Welcome to the Goat Show. Woo, we got a few people in the room already. I think people are starting to get excited about Overpower again. Yeah, that's right. Hello, everybody. Glad to have you all here. Just want to take a second as you all swoop on into the room. I think everybody's excited about this topic. I think everybody's probably started to dabble on it themselves. Well, hello, Andrew Taylor. Hello, Mages Musing. Glad to see you all. Sean will chat afterwards after the show. Uh, well, let's get this party started. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the Overpower Mountain Podcast, and I am your host, Marcel, greatest Overpower player of all time. I see everybody starting to join the chat. Glad to have you all today. I'd love for you to all be very active today on the chat. I think this episode is going to be a little bit more of like a thought exercise, helping everybody sort of dive into this new ERB set and meta as it really truly starts to evolve. Howard, Anthony, Traveling Goof, Sean, Lawrence, Joshua, glad to have you all here. Wow, is this summer just flying by or what? With that, we are about literally about halfway through the Overpower season. By the end of this month, 3 out of the 6 NAOL tournaments will be done. 2 out of the 4 regional tournaments will be done. 2025 is about to be halfway completed by the end of this month, of course. But of course, let's not get ahead of ourselves. You know how the show always starts, and that's, of course, with Overpower. Overpower News. What do you got for the news, Marcel? What do you got for the news? Well, let's start out with the basics and the things you already start to get culminating with. First, of course, still time to sign up and make plans for the Overpower Palooza that seems to be happening August 29th to 31st. August 29th, it's draft pods all day. Okay, Convention Center, Columbus. I'm pretty sure they're just taking draft pods of like 4 to 8 people. I'm not exactly sure how many. So get there quickly, play the drafts. Super fun. Way to get a good amount of cards too quickly. On the 30th, Regional number 2. Modern format, $20,000 prize pool. First place, $10,000 and 5 boxes of ERB. I didn't really tell many people about this, but when I opened my box that I won from ERB, I also happened to be very lucky and get 2 UR foils in it. It was the Lancelot and the Angry 8. And I have to say, it kind of made up for, maybe not placing a little bit higher in the tournament. And I know it was a fluke box, and, I'll take it. That's for sure. But don't, sway on the product that you also get when you basically when you get into this top 8. So with that being said, regional number 2, very exciting. I think it's going to be a huge tournament, but we're about to get into that in a few minutes anyway. So on the 31st, the NAOL Legacy Tour. Hello, Eric Counts. Hello, Philip Keffer. Glad to have you both in here as well. Yes, both in a single box. We have the NAOL Legacy Tour stop in Ohio as well. They crunched them together. They made it happen. This Overpower Palooza weekend is 3 straight days of Overpower. Make sure you tell your significant other, you tell your job that it is time for you to have a weekend for you. Okay, this weekend is all about you. It's what you've been working for. It's why you watch this show. It's why you go on the Discord and the Facebook. This is your weekend of just non-stop Overpower. This reminds me very much of the old national days when you actually showed up the day before for the qualifier, and then at the night there was just games in the hotel all night long, and then of course the next day was the big nationals, and then of course the following day I'm sure people were lurking around as well. So of course, with that being said though, the regional $25 entry fee to try to get your hands on that $10,000 prize pool. Okay. Then, of course, the NAOL Legacy Tour always works where I believe it's a $50 entry fee, and then they work off how many people entered to how much you will ultimately win. It generally falls around the, I hope you're not listening, IRS, $1,000 area. But with this amount of people showing up to this weekend, I could imagine that could ultimately actually be quite higher. Again, 3 straight days of Overpower to end the first half of the season. And then, of course, we go into the All-Star break, right? Wouldn't that just be amazing? You won't want to miss this weekend. So again, Columbus, August 29th through 31st. Of course, more contact through Doug Sims or LRG themselves to get more information. Same weekend is PAX West. Now, this is in Seattle. We're talking August 29th to 31st. They are demoing, showing the new game. From what I heard as well, and I have confirmed it with him, Andrew Taylor, the prodigy, will be present at PAX West. He has told me that autographs on Galactus cards, complimentary. All you have to do is pay him a compliment, and he will literally sign your Galactus card for you. So make sure you get out to PAX West because, of course, part of the LRG team will also be there as well, promoting this amazing game with your, chance to get that 7 any power card, the Invincible. And then, of course, I'm not sure if you can still get the Rexplode promo or if that's just the one-off moment. So maybe not confirmed on that one in particular. And of course, released today, the con exclusive Witchblade playmat. Looks really awesome. Would go very well with that Witchblade promo from, back in the day in the New York Comic Con 2024, maybe, I believe. Lastly, news regarding the cards being released north of the border in Canada. Finally, crickets. Let's get on this. And that's the news. Overpower. Overpower news. Whew, that was fast and furious, but it was a lot of sort of regurged information, we may say, in that regard. So I didn't want to really sort of sway too much and spend too much time on it because, friends, you don't come here for the news. You come here for the knowledge. And we're about to get to some of that as well. So this is the point where I want you to be very active. I will be reading your comments and sort of trying to sort of work in the audience here as well. But let's kind of get this started. This regional is racing up fast, okay? I hope you have started to hone in on your deck and you start gaining experience with it. As you can recall, one of the main things I pointed out in the recap episode was that the 2 gentlemen who were in first and second is, of course, practice. We talking about practice? Practice. It's one of the things that will just escalate you because remember, this tournament's going to be bigger than the one that just happened. And in the one that just happened, you had to go 5-2. You had to have 5 wins and only 2 losses to make it into the top 8. That was the record, the minimum record to reach top 8. There was no 4-3s. So you knew when you lost that second game, you had to go all out at that point in time. In Columbus, depending on how many people show up, you may have to go 6-1 to make top 8. You may only be affording 1 loss. Now, I noticed a few viewers just dropped off there as well, and they probably all just heard me say that you need experience and practice, and they probably all just said, well, I probably should stop watching this show and go practice, but that's the wrong move, because now comes the knowledge. I don't think it's the time yet, but to go 7-0 to make it into the top 8, but when OP first came out, I remember you had to go 6-0 just to make it into the Nationals the qualifier day before. 6-0, you couldn't even lose a game to get into the Nationals the following day. Obviously went 6-0 myself and made it into the Nationals, just if you're all curious, where I met a great friend, that's for sure. So be prepared. Be prepared for what's about to happen at the end of this month. And I'm saying this because it's about to lead up into our topic. As I was watching tape recently, and again, all I have to watch for the modern meta is 7 games, and I'm in one of them. LRG, can you please release the top 8 games of the tournament the regional that just occurred? I don't believe you're actually editing or doing anything to them, so just, click upload. And we all want to see the quarterfinals, semifinals, and, finals. So as I was watching the tape that we do have, though, I noticed something. I noticed somebody's deck, and I started asking some questions. And that also, as I was recently playtesting, the same question popped up because not only the deck that I was watching inspired me to sort of have this thought exercise, but when I was playtesting as well, the decks I was playing against really, really got me thinking as I was playing against them. Is a max 7 deck competitive in this new modern environment? I would have immediately told you no. I would have immediately said, "No, you need at least a mono 8, you need at least this." I've seen a couple, 7s and max 6 decks in the past, but they all had some weird gimmicky sort of thought, and none of them really ever truly worked. I don't know if that's the case. Again, recently in this playtesting, it sort of came up, that question, like, are max 7 decks competitive in the modern environment? In short, yes, they are. However, in the full answer, there's many complications that could arise in a max 7 deck. Now, do the pros outweigh the cons in the deck? Does the synergy create a world where the lack of 8 seem futile? I think we should start with the short answer, which is yes, max 7 decks work. And before we get to that rest of this podcast where everything works, please do subscribe. The channel is trying to get to 500 subscribers, and we got a long way to go. So subscribe, leave a comment. It all helps the channel grow and keeps me motivated to keep bringing you the best Overpower content out there. So again, subscribe, like, and comment. But of course, now back to the show. So max 7s, to start with the short answer of yes. Max 7s already have actually shown us a historic deck in this short little glimpse that we have, okay? But sort of. I'm going to call it a 7-ish style deck. In the Seattle Regional, a max 7 deck made the top 8. A player by the name of Thomas K brought Robin Hood, Joan of Arc, Mina Harker, and Cthulhu in reserve. Now, I know. Marcel, Cthulhu is an 8. Okay, Cthulhu is an 8. However, he only used 1/8, and he had no access to it other than through a KO of his frontline characters. Or you killing one of his characters. So I'm not really going to classify it as an 8. I'm just going to look at the overall conceptual deck concept that he built. Now, Thomas used the angle of string attacks, constantly using allies in front of the big chain attacks, even putting in an event to get allies for him. That's how much he actually felt they added to his deck. And he was right. Going consistently ally into Joan's inspirational leadership for 2 more additional attacks after that, or ally into Cthulhu's network of fanatics, both gaining 2 attacks afterwards by teammates. Plus teamworks, both from additional teamworks being placed in reserved and on his front line. Opponents almost never felt safe. Also, once EFL hit the board from Joan of Arc, and the Call of Cthulhu hit the board. Now, I'm not saying they hit the board. Friends, those things hit the astral plane. Now, I've always told you to look out for these on cards because those are huge, huge, huge things to actually look for. These are not getting clipped to the opponent. So, Call of Cthulhu, -5 to all of opponents, KO. That sits in the astral plane. Cthulhu dies, that's still there. EFL dies, that's still there. Now, EFL didn't help him per se past Joan of Arc on this deck, but that's just something to consider as you move forward. That card stays in play. Those astral plane cards are really something you do have to pay attention to. When both of those cards hit the table for him, opponents were almost counting their turns until defeat. This is like an all gas version of a max 7-ish sort of style deck. Now, he did have Fairy Protection in there as a big emergency break. So, okay, if we start this thought experiment out with actual historic fact, which is always a good way to start your deck builds, right? Has something that I'm trying to even think about made it anywhere? Is it a decent deck? Is there legs to it? Well, a max 7 deck with speed. It shows you that there's potential there. It's been shown to work. It leaned very hard, though, on the gimmick of that additional attack instead of going for like a solid grid approach, which is where I think most people will sort of be branching into as we enter this regional, at least the next one coming up. In my playtesting recently, 2 decks stuck out to me that an opponent played against me. I asked his permission if I could speak about those decks today, and I was given said permission because I didn't want that person to be playing either of these decks, and I'm starting to sort of rip into them, and then all of a sudden there's copycats all over. But these particular 2 decks that I played in playtesting against this person, whew, they got me. They got me. And in order the first and then better the second. And it's truly where my mind finally said, and started to wrap around this real question of max 7 in ERB modern format. So again, I do have permission to speak about these. In ERB, it feels like you're already sacrificing something. Whether it's points going towards one of the big 8 characters or mono-suiting, with the pillars of Leoro. Did you get it? Leonidas, Zorro, Leoro, the pillars of Leoro. Okay. Anyways, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Power and low points, like power of character and low points, seem to be in the 7s anyway. Let's explore these decks that I saw that particular day in playtesting. First, a very mono-suited style deck, okay? Leoro. The mono-suited style deck, but I thought played incredibly well. Robin Hood, Van Helsing, Deja Thoris, and Billy the Kid in reserve. Now, it had the Land That Time Forgot as its home base. And I'm not going to go on about the Land That Time Forgot. The land that time forgot. The home base that everybody seems to forget. Obviously, we'll touch on it in a second. This deck was death by 1,000 cuts. With grid essentially backed up throughout the whole deck, you found a familiar balance in a negator, an avoid character, and a powerhouse side shotgun character. With the added spice of hard to block hits from Van Helsing's right tools for the job, the JW Style 3, and after concession attacks from the Land That Time Forgot, this deck had defense and attack. Not overly actually relying on a gimmick, but finding synergy in the grids and overall balance of the characters. Sprinkle in a little bit of spiciness with that aggressiveness and from the land that time forgot. And you even have three Reaper defenses, from Van Helsing's Negate to Deja's Avoid, to even a shift into Van Helsing's Sacred Wafers. It also seemed to have a way to sort of stop the Reaper every time it came across the board, which I was rather impressed at with what I thought few Reaper stops. Least to say, though, I was impressed with what I saw. Then he pulled out the deck that made me truly believe a max 7 deck is possible and competitive. And the next deck I'm about to talk about, I actually think could not only top 8, but win a tournament. And it really, when I played against it, at first I was like, oh no, I'm just going to take that character out, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. And then all of a sudden, the deck turned on. He was playing Captain Nemo, Tarzan, Count of Monte Cristo, and Billy the Kid in reserve with the round table. I don't know what hit me, but at first glance, dual suit, that's what I saw. And then I looked deeper at the deck, and I recognized the grid greatness that is occurring. Both Nemo and Count have that 6 combat that already works with the deck. Then flexing to the 2 additional 7 intelligences, the grid alignment just alone made me go, wow, that's really good. Like, that's really impressive. And those characters all have their own panache. But how does it work? And then he started playing. This deck had me guessing between the Count's Avoid, Tarzan's Pure Avoid, and Nemo's personal and teammate block-off style Avoid. I was baffled. He was avoiding things left, right, and center, let alone making me discard cards from my hand. Next thing I know, Tarzan just comes swinging in, laughing, throwing 7s and 5s. Not to mention showing me he is the Lord of the Jungle in one of the rounds. I got it. I understood. Draw 3s, 10 attack, global defense. Perfect dual suit style deck. I thought I was playing a legacy style Lambo at times against this deck. There was too much going on. I had no defense and I had no negates. I didn't know what to do. It was amazing. To the point where I almost didn't talk about it tonight because I dabbled with it in my own playtesting recently. But I think I'm honing in on my own deck. I'm down to my final 2 and playtesting them hard. When you talk about a deck this long and you don't even mention friend or foe from Count or ethnologist, what? Or even the cataclysm that's in the deck, you know this deck is already popping. I wanted to bring these decks up to get your creative juices going. Thank you, Sean Ballantyne, by the way. Those were his decks, for allowing me to speak about them. And thank you, Thomas K, as well, for, letting me chat about your deck as well. So let's break down the pros and cons of Max 7. Now we're going to get into a bit of the long answer, now that we've kind of just got our mind in this Max 7 idea. Pros and cons. We need to weigh them to know if we find what we want in a solid deck, like what I just explained to you. Well, obviously the major issue right away, power pack. Power pack. It might be one of the most important pieces of current modern deck building right now. Power pack. Getting to the power pack with no 8 is tough. However, when playing a game against 8s and you do not have them, you know, focusing on your opponent's 8 characters, with all your attack might could mitigate that. But even with that approach, you're still going to have two big problems. Number one, you have to find 3 additional cards to put in your deck. 3 plus, depending on how many 8s you were actually going to play in your deck. 3 plus cards, people are finding a hard time to get up to 56. Now, I'm going to tell you in the regional that just passed, I actually ran 62 cards. I mean, I did have 2 events, so, you could kind of get that down back to 60, but wow. Wow. People were running 51 with no events. You might have to go to that if you're trying to run a max 7 style deck, because you have to find 3 additional cards. Now, they could be specials, they could be universe cards, but it's not like Legacy where you could pick this home base that had 20 20 activators, and you just sort of have 20 draws in your deck, and then by all means you don't even need 8s at that particular time. But if you're in a situation where all you can put in is specials for the characters, a set design of any heroes, give or take 1 or 2, and universe cards, you need to fill those 3 slots with either universe cards or, of course, as we mentioned, more power cards of a lower nature, specials. You set yourself up in different ways for either duplication or when a character gets KO'd, having more pressure on you with those duplicates. Or discards, I guess I should say in that matter. That's only problem number 1. Problem number 2, in the long answer, you have to have a way to actually block those 8 power cards when they're coming at you. Now, we all know how hard it is to block a 9 or a 10 in this game. In Legacy, no issue. 1 to 9, a 10 or an 11. Oh, you got over that 9. Well, I'm going to use 1 defense for my activator site, and we're cruising. Well, yeah, you still have your Freya, and you have your fairy protection if you chose that as your cataclysm. But guess what? You have 2 of those. And sure, some decks, Deja Thoris or, Leonidas or somebody with global style avoid, you gain another one, but you're using that on an 8? What if you look across the table and you see Leonidas and you see John Carter? You're dealing with 4 8s potentially in one round. How are you going to block all of those? You have to have that foresight if you're going with a max 7 style deck. Now, as we showed in our historic view, he used string attacks, quickness, speed to basically say, I have 8 cards, you have 8 cards. My 8 cards are coming faster at you. I don't care about your single 8. Now, you can also mitigate it as well by, finding points with these 7 characters, as, a lot of them are underpointed of that 19 value. And you can pick up a Spartan Training Ground or a Drax Armory, which immediately right there might actually even it out. 3 accesses to those, 3 8s generally across the board. All of a sudden, yeah, you're using up your 5s to block his 8s or her 8s. It works. So if you can find that synergy, that might be a good way to mitigate it. But that doesn't always work as well. I think once you get past this initial thought, though, the deck should actually line up pretty evenly across the board. It's just 3 cards, and I mean, it could line up where, it's 8 first round, 8 second round, 8 third round for your opponent. You have to deal with those 8s all consecutively, but generally you're going to have a whole game to have to deal with those 8s. And that's even, not even talking about the remove aspect that is very prevalent in the ERB set as well.
With KO pressure almost being the name of the game in Modern, would you even miss those cards in the first 5 rounds? What's a single eight across the board? Now, you look across the board and you see Leonidas with an eight and an eight placed, and then you look over and, you see John Carter with an any power eight there and his multi eight on the back home base. Yeah, you're not happy. I don't know how many decks would be happy seeing that. I don't know how many decks would be able to deal with something like that. But you do have to keep a few things in consideration. Power Pack is real. Power Pack games are real. Out of my 8 regional games that I played, 2 of them went to Power Pack. It's 25% of my games that day went to Power Pack, at least 1 or 2 hands. If I had no 8 character, as a matter of fact, one of the games I won was because my final attack was to kill their last 8 character, and then I had, 7 Billy against their 6, Jane. And game was over. You have to think, especially, and again, I'm not sure if it's going to work the same way, but quarterfinals, semifinals, finals were all untimed. These games could easily go to Power Pack if 2 people are really just tuned in and honing in. A couple things I'm going to sort of just throw out there as ideas as I was, using this thought exercise, and a couple of these popped in my mind. So maybe they'll help or inspire great thoughts from you. So if you went max 7, I think you should have several big venture win conditions. Now, those could be combos in your deck. Um, those could be keying in on your opponent's 8 characters with all your attacks. Maybe synchronizing with one of the new events that could potentially give you a moment to push as well. These are win conditions you have to add in. I don't think if you built a max 7 deck that's straight balanced and you played another balanced deck that had dual 8s, Lioro, the pillars, are you looking across at the pillars of Lioro? I don't think in a straight up game where cards are even that you're going to do too well. I think those mitigating factors I talked about earlier will come into play, and there'll be pretty pivotal moments where I'm going to look across the board. No, you can't block this 8 because you already used your Freya. You already used your Avoid. That's it. You can't block it. I know you can't. It's the kill shot for your character. Done. Your character's over. Now, don't forget though, if you have all these win conditions and your deck is, purring away in these first few sort of rounds, you may not even need to stress about that. Again, the win conditions are the way your max 7 deck will win. It's not going to win just based off straight value to another, pillar 8 style deck across the board, or even a mono 8 style deck. Now, mono 8 will be a bit better because you can hone in those attacks, as I mentioned. Don't forget, just because it's a max 7 deck, you have to ask all the same questions. What is the deck doing for you conceptually? What are you creating it to do? Are you doing Deja Thoris with Count, and you're trying a double draw 3 style deck with Lady of the Lake as well as a third draw 3, and you're trying that mechanic? Okay. What are your Reaper defenses in your deck? The Reaper's real. Every episode I talk about it. So if you don't get it by now, the Reaper's real. He's coming across the board. You need to stop him. Is there any other characters that could potentially actually work better in your deck? With the 7 characters, the best thing about it is there's tons of 18s. There's tons of 19, well, not tons, but there's tons of 18s, there's 19s, there's 20s. There's even a couple 21s and there's a couple 17s. You flex in a 6 character in there as well. You're talking about 16s. You can really fit a lot of stuff in there. Switch your characters out. Playtest, 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 playtest. These max 7 decks could be very lethal if you get the right synergy with some specials going. And you can get away where you can get those early through maybe like a non one per deck mechanic. As we're talking right now, just popping in my mind, it feels like if you were to build a max 7 deck, it almost, and I'm, don't quote me on it, but it feels like Nemo would just be like either like the centerpiece or just the side piece that just like is gonna like put that max 7 deck over the top. Captain Nemo, there's just something about that guy. That Nautilus is a real darn good ship. Playtest, playtest, playtest. Flex in characters, flex out characters. The night before the regional, I flexed in a new character because I was playtesting. And it just made sense. Their cards, just every time they came up, made more sense for what my deck was trying to do at that moment in time. So the change happened. And I wasn't too happy about doing it the night before, but when you see something so evident, you don't question it. You go with your gut. Playtest, playtest, playtest. Don't get caught not knowing how to play your own deck. Don't show up with a meta deck of the Pillars of Leoro, and next thing you know, you're like, I don't even know how to play this deck. Am I placing this? Am I just waiting for the Zoro fives? Am I just trying to throw all these big attacks? What am I doing? Who's my third character with Leoro? Am I going the Deja route? Am I going the Deja route one way, or am I going the Robin Hood route the other way, or am I putting something new in there? What are you doing? You know, the great thing about the sevens, there is a combat, an energy, a brute force, and an intelligence character. And there's even a dual suited energy intelligence character 7. All reserve, all can do something. That's solid. If you're doing a max 7 deck, I think that's a very good place to start. A very good place to start. Now I'm talking about Billy the Kid. I'm talking about Morgan Le Fay. I'm talking about the Intelligence 7, Victory Harbin, the Dual 7, of course, being Carson, right? And then, of course, the Brute Force 7 being Anubis. Got it. Woo! Got through them all. So pick one of those. Put them in reserve and start to build from there. What's that reserve doing for you? And what 7 characters with massive specials and strategies work with that reserve? There's a lot of power in the 7 characters of ERB, plus point savings, with many priced at 18 points. Is there a new combo? Is there a new big legacy style combo of 4/7 characters that shift the meta? I think there is. The Lambo from the Legacy was about the Jammers and Witch. Everybody thought it was about Spawn. It was about the Jammers and Witch. Spawn was the glue that held it together. Could the new electric version of the Lambo be Count and Merlin? Woo! Jammers and Witch, Count and Merlin? Sounds like you got the same power, different ways. Who's the glue that keeps those two together? Let your mind get lost in this thought experiment of max 7 overpower. You never know what deck you might find just crisscrossing characters. One of the best things I actually did, a week before the regional, as I was honing in on my the Seattle regional, I actually got out all the characters, not their specials, the actual character cards, and I literally started playing mix and match. And I put it there and I put it there, and I just started point mixing matching. And I was like, okay, I need a 19. So I went to my 19 stack and I looked at who was there and I started mixing and matching. Whoa, there was some really wild deck concepts that just popped up. Take all your character cards out and just start mixing and matching decks. Next thing you know, you're going to come up with some really wild and conceptual thoughts to it. You never know what deck you might find mixing and matching and having these thought experiments. Or what combo or synergy hasn't been found yet? What hasn't been tapped yet? What two characters? I know for a fact that Merlin and King Arthur work well together. Now, you're giving up the 3 points right there. I don't think that's worth it. But is there a synergy in characters that can be found that just will blow the opponent away? I don't care if you have the Pillars of Leoro. All that combat's gonna do nothing against me because I have this deck. I know what it's doing, and I've already thought about what the meta deck is and how to defeat it. And not only that, I've play tested against the Pillars of Leoro consistently and beat it nonstop. You know, can your deck stand up to the current meta of the Pillars of Leoro? Again, these are all the questions that you're going to have to ponder as this regional starts to creep up. Use this episode as a thought experiment. Now, you should start honing in on those decks very, very, very shortly, okay? You shouldn't be playtesting too many sporadic different decks as you're going in. You really want to be able to play your style, play your deck, just know it well. Boom, I place this here, I place that there, I attack that character. He starts to attack this character, this is how I shift. All the thoughts you need to put into it. I believe there's a max 7 deck out there that has your stamp on it. Prove it. I look forward to seeing everybody very shortly. Listen, I just want to say thanks for watching. This week's episode was a bit of a different take. And it was sort of a journey getting back into the discovery that decks aren't defined. Meta's not defined. I found myself falling into the Pillars of Leoro, like as if I didn't know how to build decks. Now, I'm not saying that might not win the next regional. It might. But if everybody is thinking to go against it, or thinking to go with it, you might just have those thoughts that makes you second place in the next regional, because of course, yours truly will be there. So, thanks again for watching, friends. Don't just fall into that meta trap. Be the change you want to see in Overpower. Keep thinking Overpower, deck building, and getting to the top of the mountain. This is the Overpower Mountain Podcast. I am the OPGOAT. Good night, my friends.